Hey everyone, this is Spooky from ArmoredTalk.com, your blog and website covering armored warfare news and information. Today we have something a little bit different for you. This is a premium tank on the Russian server. If you do not recognize it, it is the MBT-70 premium tier 6 main battle tank in armored warfare. Premium tank's main purpose is to allow you to earn credits faster because they have a credit multiplier built into them. This has not come to the North American and European servers yet. You can see it in the tech tree, you just can't buy it. And the only reason you can't buy it yet is there's not a way of getting gold on the North American or European servers. As they've done in a lot of the other tests, the Russian server has gone first in the ability to be able to get gold and then purchase premium tanks and play them. The Russian server continues to be the early test bed for North American and European markets, but that's not always true. Just last weekend, the NA and EU servers were able to test out the new gameplay mode, which were the 5 encounter maps where both teams fight over the same cap area. It's going to be interesting to see what changes Armored Warfare makes to the encounter mode in upcoming patches. This video today is going to go ahead and show you two different gameplays of the MBT-70 tier 6 main battle tank, as well as an interesting ending you're probably not going to want to miss. If you're not familiar with the actual tank in real life, the MBT-70 was a joint venture between Germany and the United States. You could say it was sort of the grandfather to both the Abrams and the Leopard 2. In Armored Warfare, this tank has a lot heavier armor in the front, or actually overall, so it does bounce a lot of shots or block shots, especially from lower tiers. Lower tiers have a hard time penetrating this from the front. I would say that this tank is a pure brawler, and actually here against these lower tier tanks, heat probably should have been used. You can notice that it takes a while for the aiming circle to tighten up to be able to shoot, so you're not going to be sniping or shooting from a long distance in this tank. The mobility is pretty good, the acceleration is not that great, but at top speed, once you get going, you're able to move along and relocate on the map pretty well. The gun has a lot of pen. It seems to be able to penetrate most tanks, and generally doesn't have an issue even penetrating tier 7s. The alpha damage is pretty high on it. We'll take a look at it, comparing it to the other tier 6 main battle tank that's currently in the game after this particular battle gets over. The other downside, I would say, along with the aiming circle takes a little while to tighten up to be for accuracy, is the reload is slower than a lot of the other tanks. It really takes a little while to get used to the slower reload, but that's generally to be expected when you have a gun that's doing more damage than other tanks on the tier, or at least other main battle tanks on the tier. Earlier in the video I mentioned that the heat rounds probably should have been used. The main reason, of course, being that the heat round does more damage. I think the rolls are 800 or higher on the MBT-70. So when you have the opportunity when facing a lower tier tank or a vehicle that doesn't have much armor, heat is usually the better option. Although coming up next is a Leopard 2AV. We're going to take a look at the comparison between these two tanks after this battle gets over. But the Leopard 2AV is the other tier 6 main battle tank in the game, so these two should be fairly comparable. It looks like the Leopard 2AV was injured already by the time the MBT-70 rolls up to it, and the MBT-70 doesn't necessarily play the best here. But the game's pretty well in hand, and the MBT-70 does have a lot of hit points left to trade. But it sounds like on the Russian side of things, people believe this tank might be a little overpowered currently. You think that with the buffs coming to all main battle tanks in an upcoming release, that the front armor of this particular tank won't seem to be so overpowered. But I do admit that the MBT-70 does work quite well at the moment. Whether that's due to the other tanks needing buffing, or this one might just be a little bit overpowered, I don't know. Or maybe it's just people haven't found out how to play against it yet. Time will tell. With that earlier battle, probably wasn't too fair to the Leopard 2AV, because I think that's one of the tanks they're actually going to be buffing in an upcoming release too. This match is almost over with, but we're going to go ahead and take a look at another match. Before we do that, I wanted to actually compare this tank to that Leopard 2 AV and just looking at their stats to see how they match up. You know, I really don't want to spend too much time looking at statistics of vehicles because they can change so much. This is early access test after all, and Obsidian will be using internal metrics as well as player feedback to adjust tanks as necessary. So we'll take a look at the victory screen real quick before we look at a comparison with the Leopard 2 AV and take a look at the next gameplay. So what was that? It's almost 4,000 damage. So let's go ahead and take a look at the differences between the two Tier 6 main battle tanks that are currently in the game. On the left, we have the statistics for the MBT-70, and on the right, the Leopard 2 AV. Working down from the top, you can see that the alpha damage of the MBT-70 at 567 is a lot greater than the damage that the 2AV can deal out. You know, there's almost a 200-point difference with that one being 385. Penetration values are also quite a bit better in the MBT-70. If you start looking at the actual damage per minute statistics, though, the 2AV does have a little bit of a slight edge at 200 more damage per minute. That's not a huge difference. Depending on the other statistics, it can be a big deal if you have tanks that are otherwise comparable. You'd want to choose the one with the higher damage per minute. You're looking at the hit points. The MBT-70 has 200 less hit points, 967 versus 2164. MBT-70 has a bit of a advantage in the amount of armor that's in the hull at 252 in the front versus 215. The hull modifier also is greater at 1.5 versus the 1.3. Turret-wise, the 2AV actually takes a little bit of the lead. You know, their top speeds are identical at 68.4 kilometers per hour. You know, when looking at the gameplay reviews, I thought this tank moved pretty well, that being the MBT-70. Well, getting back to the comparison between the MBT-70 and the Leopard 2 AV, the camouflage values of the two tanks are the same, but you are not driving a main battle tank for the camouflage value. It is interesting to note that the vision of the MBT-70 at 300 meters is 50 meters less than the Leopard 2 AVs. Gun depression on both tanks are fairly decent at -8 and -9 for the two. Turret traverse speed is identical. The aim time and the accurate speed, though, are a differentiator between these two vehicles. You've noticed in this gameplay that the aiming speed of the MBT-70 is rather on the slow end. It takes a while for the aiming circle, to go from the large circle diameter down to the tighter, where your shots are more accurate. You know, the MBT-70's aim time is listed as 3.8 seconds compared to the Leopard's 2AV's 3.4 seconds. That may not sound like a big difference, but it is. And comparatively speaking to some of the other vehicles in the game, that aim time is pretty slow. So putting all this together, what this really means is between these two main battle tanks at Tier 6, in selecting the MBT-70 over the Leopard 2 AV, you're giving up some aim time and some accuracy and some vision, which would be more helpful for somebody who has more of a longer range sniping type gameplay in mind. You're also going to have a lot slower reload in the MBT-70, but what you're gaining is significant, especially in the meta of main battle tanks being used similar to heavies, which is brawling in a city. Sometimes up close and personal combat in these type of games, the higher alpha damage wins because it's simply able to choose when it comes out and shoots and fires, and it's going to be dealing more damage each time it does that compared to the tanks it's facing. So what this really boils down to is the MBT-70, in my opinion, is a pure brawler. You have the frontal armor that's able to bully lower tiers, and you have a gun that has pretty significant alpha damage. To compensate for those advantages, of course, you need to give something up, and in the case of the MBT-70, it's a slower reload speed, and your accuracy and aim time are not as good as many other tanks. But for players who like to brawl, this may be the tank for them. And speaking of brawling, let's go ahead and take a look at a little bit more aggressive gameplay of an MBT-70. Here we have two of them working together. What's interesting is this is actually not a platoon of MBT-70s. It's just two players that decided to work together, that or just had the same idea of where to deploy. As you can see coming down that hill, they have some significant speed built up, so this is not necessarily a slow main battle tank. Acceleration may not be the greatest, but once it gets up to speed, it can relocate pretty well. Here, I kind of feel sorry for the other team. We have two MBT-70s working together, and I don't think a tier lower Leopard 1 and a Starship are going to have much chance against two MBT-70s. It's actually kind of funny, this pair of MBT-70s that are working pretty well together have outdistanced their team quite a bit. But they are top tier and they do have good frontal armor, so they do need to be the bullies leading the push. I do have to say that overall this MBT-70, as it exists right now, is looking to be a very good tank. And even though we've talked about how it's not the most accurate tank or the aiming speed's slow, it can deliver some accurate shots, just as that one showed. It took a little while for the aiming circle to tighten up, but there was nothing wrong with the results of that shot. Here I'm a bit surprised they did not go ahead and clear the corner at the AB0 area. There was obviously a tank back there that's shooting. I suppose maybe it was just a Leopard, and so that lead MBT-70 was not too concerned about it. But it is able to go ahead and do damage later on in the match. So, but taking care of the enemy's MBT-70 was probably more important to do, and I think that's why we turn around and make sure that gets taken care of, although that enemy MBT-70 has a lot of tanks around it and it's going to be dying fairly soon anyway. As you can probably see with the hill helping the acceleration, the MBT-70 can feel like it's a pretty mobile tank at times. At this point in time, this game is pretty well in hand, with the blue team leading 7 kills to 2. A large part of the collapse of the enemy team's northern flank was due to the fact that those two MBT-70s were working well together and did a pretty fast and quick push. That was really the main reason I want to show you this gameplay, was just to show that, especially when they're top tier, they can bully and push the other tanks around the map. Here we're going to go ahead, and looks like that MBT-70 is going to take care of the tank that was left alive earlier. It didn't take long to dispatch him, and you'll notice that the front of the MBT-70 does bounce a lot of shots. This being a premium tank in Armored Warfare means that it earns extra credits. This is a tank that is going to be a part of the Lord of War package. This one tank may be an incentive to pick up that pack as long as they don't nerf it too much during these tests. Oh, poor Tier 5. Coming up against an MBT-70 you cannot penetrate, and it's going to go ahead and eliminate you pretty quickly. You probably should have kept moving. That's hard to remember to always do. Your hats. We're going to go ahead and speed this video up. The end of it wasn't all that exciting, and I think it showed you what it needed to show you already. So over 500,000 credits with the multiplier this last weekend, and it's no great surprise that these two MBT-70s took first and second place in the game results. So I'll go ahead and leave you with what happens when two MBT-70s meet each other head on. Have a good day, everybody.